So, Supergirl's not out yet. Nobody's bought a ticket. Nobody has seen the full movie, well, at least publicly. Nobody knows whether this thing is going to soar, stumble, or land with all the grace of a flaming studio memo, and somehow, we're already at the stage where the audience feels like it's being pre-blamed. I know, amazing, right? Hollywood really has perfected this routine. Drop a trailer, get mixed reactions, watch the media ecosystem start circling with think pieces about fandom, toxicity, sexism, culture wars, and why the audiences are the real problem. Then act confused when people get even more irritated. And that is why this Supergirl situation matters. Because this is not just about Millie Alcock. It's not just about one trailer. It's not just about even one quote. And it's not even about James Gunn. This is about a bigger problem. It's about a DC brand that still has not earned trust. It's about a reboot that was sold like a fresh start, but still feels fragile. And it's about a studio system that keeps trying to manage the reaction before the product has even proven itself. That's the tell. Because confident franchises do not spend this much time trying to shape the discourse before release. Confident franchises let the movie speak. Confident franchises do not feel like one wave of skepticism could turn into a Category 5 panic event. But DC? Well, DC still feels shaky. And when a brand feels shaky, every trailer becomes a referendum. Every interview becomes a controversy. Every awkward PR beat starts to feel like the excuse machine warming up in the driveway. So let's talk about the Supergirl backlash, the trailer, the CinemaCon problem, the Chuck Dixon criticism, James Gunn's increasingly defensive strategy, and the real issue underneath all of it. Because this is not just a Supergirl story. This is a DC credibility story. Welcome back to The Critical Nerd. For the returning subscribers out there, I humbly say thank you, and you already know the deal. For those of you that are new here, this is the channel where we cut through the access media fog, follow the receipts, and say the quiet part out loud when Hollywood would much rather hand you a press release and call it journalism. So if you like box office autopsies, franchise analysis, industry chaos, and commentary with a memory longer than one news cycle, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because when the marketing gets louder, the receipts matter more. And right now, DC needs receipts, so let's get into it. Now let's start here. A lot of people want to reduce this entire situation to one easy talking point. They want to say this is just angry fans being angry, or they want to say this is just another example of people refusing to accept a female-led superhero movie, or they want to say this is all fake outrage created by YouTube and social media. That's lazy. That's convenient. And more importantly, it really misses the point. Because the real issue is not simply that Supergirl is getting backlash. The real issue is that audiences do not fully trust the new DCU yet. That's it. That's the story. James Gunn and Peter Safran came in selling a fresh beginning, a real plan, a connected universe, a smarter strategy. A course correction after years of confusion, false starts, tonal whiplash, reboots inside reboots, and corporate nonsense that made DC feel less like a studio and more like a group project where nobody read the assignment. That was the pitch. And on paper, sounded good. But trust is not built through announcements. It's not built through social media replies. It's not built through studio presentations. And it is definitely not built through fan accounts posting, "Let him cook," for 18 months straight. Trust gets built through output. And right now, the DCU still feels like it is asking the audience to believe before it has fully earned belief. That is why every Supergirl conversation feels loaded. That is why mixed reactions hit harder. That is why the discourse around this movie already feels tense, because people are not reacting to this film in a vacuum. They are reacting to years of DC instability. And that brings us to the trailer, because the trailer reaction tells you almost everything. Not everybody loved it. Not everybody hated it. It was mixed. Some people liked Billy Alcock. Some people liked the visuals. Some people liked the cosmic weirdness. Some people liked seeing crypto. Some people thought it had energy. And then there was the other half of the reaction. People are saying it felt generic. People saying it looked like another DC project filtered through the same James Gunn house style. People questioning the tone. People questioning the color grading. People questioning the characterization. People wondering whether Supergirl was being introduced as a compelling hero or as another deconstructed, jaded, messy version of an iconic character. Those are real reactions, and that is the part the media machine always struggles with. Not every skeptical audience reaction is some moral scandal. Not every negative reaction is sexism. Not every criticism is a hate campaign. Sometimes people just look at the trailer and say, yeah, I'm not sold. It's not a crime. It's not toxicity. That is the customer looking at the product. And in 2026, with superhero fatigue still hanging in the air and franchise trust at an all-time premium, not sold is a much bigger problem than Hollywood wants to admit. Because DC does not have the luxury of being met with automatic goodwill anymore. Marvel barely has that luxury. Star Wars definitely doesn't. And DC burned through that benefit of doubt years ago. So when Supergirl gets a mixed response, that is not people being irrational. That is what happens when a brand feels unsteady. Now, one reason the story got extra fuel is because longtime DC writer Chuck Dixon came out swinging on the movie's apparent tone, and whether you agree with every word he said or not, the reason it landed is simple. He verbalized a concern a lot of people already had. The core fear here is that Supergirl is not being sold as aspirational, hopeful, or even especially heroic. It's being sold with that familiar modern franchise energy. Damaged, cynical, snarky, disillusioned, rough around the edges, maybe more real, maybe more complicated, but also suspiciously similar to every other prestige area rewrite of a legacy character. And that is where people start checking out, because this is the trap modern Hollywood keeps falling into. They think darker equals deeper. They think messier equals more interesting. They think optimism is naive, sincerity is uncool, and straightforward heroism needs to be sanded down, inverted, or deconstructed before it can be taken seriously. That mindset has infected a lot of franchise storytelling, and for some characters, maybe you can make that work, but with Superman and Supergirl, that gets tricky fast. These are not characters people come for nihilism. These are not icons that need to be stripped down and repackaged as emotionally detached anti-heroes with trauma chic branding and attitude problems. These characters are supposed to represent hope, strength, inspiration, a sense that power can mean something good. So when the marketing starts leaning into a more cynical version of Kara, people notice. And when a major DC veteran calls that out publicly, it reinforces that this is not just random internet chatter. It means the concern is broader than the usual fan bickering. Now let's talk about CinemaCon, because this should have been one of those moments where DC grabbed momentum. This is where studios get to sell the future. This is where they get exhibitors excited. This is where they tell the room, here's why people are going to show up for our slate. And by a lot of the commentary coming out of that event, DC did not exactly own the room, and that matters. Because when you're still trying to establish a new universe, perception matters almost as much as product. And the takeaway from a lot of that post-CinemaCon chatter was not, DC is back. It was more like, that's it? That's a problem. Because a healthy reboot should be building momentum. It should be creating hunger. It should be giving the impression that there is a real roadmap, real confidence, real excitement. Instead, what people seemed to get was more uncertainty. No major surge of excitement toward the bigger DC slate. No sense of this unstoppable next chapter. And with Supergirl, which should have been a clean hype beat, instead felt like another project where people were still trying to talk themselves into it. That is the opposite of momentum. And when even your showcase moments feel muted, that is when the alarms start going off. Not because one convention decides the fate of a franchise, but because it reflects something larger. The room does not feel electric when the brand itself does not feel strong. Now here's where James Gunn enters the center of the conversation again, because his online style used to work for him. He was the guy who felt accessible, the guy who replied, the guy who corrected reports, the guy who joked with fans, the guy who seemed like he was more plugged in than the average studio executive. That works for a while, but eventually that same approach starts to look less like transparency and more like defensiveness. And that's where we are now. When Gunn jumps in to push back on reporting or gets combative with trade narratives or starts looking visibly annoyed by the conversation around his projects, it does not project calm confidence. It projects tension. And that tension becomes part of the marketing, whether the studio wants it or not. Because now people are not just talking about Supergirl, they're talking about Gunn's mood, Gunn's reactions, Gunn's posture toward the press, Gunn's handling of the DC brand, Gunn's future under new ownership, Gunn's ability to guide a coherent long-term universe. That is not where you want the conversation, especially when the movie really needs right now is simple: enthusiasm. What Supergirl needs is for people to say, "This looks great, I can't wait." Not, "Why does this whole thing feel tense before opening night?" And there lies the issue. Whether fair or unfair, Gunn increasingly feels like a creator who is still trying to sell the audience on his entire system, not just the next movie. And if the audience is not fully buying in, every response starts to feel more personal, more brittle, more reactive. That is not the energy of a stable franchise. That is the energy of a brand still trying to convince people it is stable. And this is where the entertainment medium deserves some of the blame too. Because people are not just reacting to a trailer, they're reacting to a pattern. The pattern goes like this. A project gets skepticism. An actor says something understandable about pressure, fandom, or online discourse. That gets reframed into a bigger moral narrative. Suddenly the discussion shifts away from whether the movie looks good and toward whether the audience is behaving properly. People have seen this cycle way too many times. It's happened with Marvel. It's happened with Star Wars. It's happened with various streaming shows and franchise reboots. And now for the second some friction appears around Supergirl, you could already feel the same old machine warming up. That is why people get irritated so quickly. It's not always about the exact quote. It is about what the quote gets used for. Because audiences know the move now. They know that if the movie stumbles, there's a ready-made excuse on the shelf. Not bad positioning, not weak trust, not creative miscalculation, not franchise fatigue, not a trailer that failed to fully connect. Oh, no, no, no. The fallback is always, the fans were weird, the internet was mean, the discourse was toxic, the audience failed the movie. And people are tired of that. They are tired of being psychoanalyzed every time they are not immediately enthusiastic about a corporate product, especially when the studio is not yet done enough to deserve automatic enthusiasm. And by the way, if you're enjoying this breakdown, do me a favor, hit the like button. It helps the channel, it feeds the algorithm something other than approved industry talking points, and it lets YouTube know there's still people out there who prefer receipts over spin. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this DC story is not going away anytime soon. Now here's the bigger problem. Supergirl is starting to feel like more than just the next movie. It's starting to feel like a referendum. A referendum on whether Gunn's tone works for these characters. A referendum on whether this reboot is actually building momentum. A referendum on whether DC under its leadership has a clear identity or just a collection of announcements, explanations, and increasingly defensive vibes. That's a lot to put on one movie, but that's where we are. Because when the larger universe does not feel locked in, every major release gets dragged into the bigger question. Not just, is this film good? But is this whole thing working? And that's why the stakes feel higher than they should. If Supergirl is great, then some of the noise fades away. The film wins people over, Millie Alcock gets her moment. The DCU gains a little more trust, and the whole backlash cycle looks premature. But if the movie is weak, if the tone feels off, if the marketing does not connect, if the box office lands with a thud, then this whole pre-release atmosphere is going to look like a warning sign people should have taken more seriously. Because right now, the movie does not feel like it's riding a wave. It feels like it's trying to outrun one. That's not ideal. So, what is the right read on all of this? Not that Millie Alcock is the problem, not that all criticism is fake, not that all fans are sexist, not that James Gunn is automatically doomed, not that one trailer decides everything. The smartest read is simpler than that. Supergirl is walking into a marketplace where DC has not fully rebuilt trust. The trailer got mixed reactions because audiences are cautious. The discourse got louder because Hollywood's media ecosystem immediately started reaching for familiar framing. Chuck Dixon's criticism landed because it tapped into an existing fear about cynical reinterpretations of legacy characters. And Gunn's public posture has made the whole atmosphere feel more reactive than confident. That is the story. This is not really about one quote. It's not even really about one trailer. It's all about a franchise still operating from a trust deficit. And a trust deficit changes everything. It changes how people hear interviews. It changes how they watch trailers. It changes how they interpret press coverage. It changes how fast skepticism turns into backlash. And it makes every awkward PR beat feel like a sign of deeper instability. That is where DC is right now, still asking to be believed. So no, I do not think the real issue here is simply that audiences cannot handle a female-led superhero movie. That is the lazy media version. That is the shortcut version. That is the version designed to shut down the conversation instead of having one. The real issue is that DC has not fully earned confidence yet. Not with this universe, not with this leadership, not with this tone, not with this long-term plan. And until that changes, every movie is going to be treated like a test. Every trailer is going to be scrutinized. Every quote is going to be overread. And every marketing stumble is going to feel like evidence that the reboot still has not found its footing. That is the cost of burned trust. You do not get to reset the clock just because you announced a new chapter. You do not get automatic goodwill because your fan base wants to believe, and you definitely do not get to pre-blame the audience before the film has proven itself. If Supergirl is great, then great. Let the movie win. Let Millie Alcock win people over. Let the performance speak louder than the discourse. Let the story do the talking. But if this turns into another example of mixed product, shaky messaging, and media lectures about fandom behavior, then audiences are going to get even more cynical next time. And honestly, they will have earned that cynicism. Because you cannot build a healthy franchise on pre-packaged excuses. You cannot rebuild a universe by scolding the customer. And you cannot demand trust from an audience that has already spent years watching this brand trip over itself in public. That trust has to be earned. Right now, DC is still trying to borrow it. That'll do it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, share this video out there with your friends and family, and let me know in the comments. Is the Supergirl backlash really about the movie itself? Or is this another case of Hollywood getting its excuses lined up before the audience has even given the final verdict? It's been The Critical Nerd. Keep your expectations low and your receipts high, and I will see you later.